Our gut lining is such an important part of our health. We talk about when we exercise our core. Oh man, if you can get your core strength up, you can do any exercise that you want. Well, the gut actually happens to be located right there too. The gut lining is the core of our health.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Thrive State Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. V, triple board certified MD and performance and longevity expert. And on this episode, we go in a little bit deeper into the microbiome. We talk about the microbiome in several different episodes in the past, including the fungal friends that we have in our gut with Dr. Mahmoud Ghanem. On this episode, we talk a little bit about how most probiotic strains have essentially the same bacteria in it. But how do you actually get bacteria that are new and novel in a form that your body could actually use? All that and more in this episode of the Thrive State Podcast. But before we dive in and introduce our guest, I want to welcome every new person listening to this podcast. This Thrive State Podcast is a show that really kind of brings in the thought leaders in the health, wellness, longevity, relationship space to give you the tools, the tactics, and the know-how on becoming your best self for living your best life. And I really curate my guests very carefully because I want to bring you the best knowledge so that you could apply that so that you could be at your best. Because when you are, I know the world is a better place. For all you who are returning to the podcast, thank you so much for being a loyal listener. If this podcast has given you value, please consider leaving a 5-star review wherever podcasts are heard. And if you haven't already, pick up the second edition of Thrive State at thrivestatebook.com. It's a second edition that I am super proud of. If you don't know, there's expanded content in the second edition where I talk about why the Thrive State is so important, why being in the Thrive State makes you resilient against foreign pathogens or the different stresses that might come into your life. What you also discover in the second edition, which is new, is the fact that energetically, how we are being in every single moment, our beingness, our energy is not only speaking to every single cell in our body, but it actually permeates outwards. Other people can feel your happiness, can feel your smile. They can also feel your scowl. So recognize how once we choose to be in the Thrive State, we could start to positively impact and transform our families, our relationships, our businesses, and our organizations. That's really a Thrive State advantage from going from me to we. And lastly, we talk about in the second edition, how to create lasting change. There's a part of our psyche and nervous system that kind of keeps us down and keeps us playing small. That's the default mode network. If we become more conscious of these programs that are limiting, we could start to make new choices that are empowering. So pick up the second edition at thrivestatebook.com. And now to this podcast where we talk about the microbiome. The microbiome, as we all know, is the plethora of the viruses, the bacteria, the fungi, all the microorganisms that live throughout our body, in our nose, in our skin, and particularly our gut. Within the lining of our gut is these microbes, and this is an entire micro ecosystem of organisms that control basically this pathway of the outside world and us on the inside. It controls our metabolism, our cravings, our mood, our immune system, and it really can control whether or not we get disease or not. So in this podcast, we actually break down the importance of the microbiome, but not only that, what is the new science that can allow us to optimize this ecosystem that we have in our gut? Who we have with us today is actually co-founder and CEO of Pendulum. Dr. Colleen Cutcliffe actually has over 25 years of experience leading and managing biology teams in academia, in pharmaceuticals, and in biotechnology. Prior to starting Pendulum, Dr. Colleen was actually the senior manager of biology at Pacific Biosciences and a scientist at Elon Pharmaceuticals. She actually finished her postdoctoral studies at Northwestern's Children's Memorial Hospital and received her PhD in biochemistry and molecular biology from the Johns Hopkins University and her BA from biochemistry at Wellesley. Not only is she an academic, she is quite a jokester as well, as you'll discover in our 5 to Thrive segment. I had an amazing time. Not only did I laugh, but I learned a lot more about the microbiome and actually how the technology within Pendulum can really shift and change our lives for the better. I can't wait for you to learn more about Pendulum and Pendulum Life. Please enjoy this conversation with Dr. Colleen Cutcliffe. Colleen Cutcliffe, welcome to the Thrive State podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. Excited to be here.
I am really super excited to dive into this topic. We've had, people on the podcast talk about the microbiome, but everybody has a little different take. So I'm really excited to find out your take on the microbiome. But before we get into that, there's a segment of the show called the 5 to Thrive. 5 questions, game show style. And I know you and I wanted to meet in real life because if you win the 5 to Thrive, you actually get a very healthy meal on me on our next meeting. So my question to you, Colleen, are you ready to play the 5 to Thrive?
Wait, so you mean there's a way to lose the 5?
Yeah. If you don't answer authentically in yourself, you're out.
Okay, all right.
There'll be a whole, crane to yank you out of the podcast. I'm just kidding.
All right, I'm as ready as I'm gonna be.
All right, here we go. Question number 1 is, as a child, what did you dream of becoming?
A dog walker.
A dog walker. So you love animals.
I love animals. And I actually, before starting this company, reconsidered being a dog walker. I literally have a binder where I wrote, there were 5 different jobs that I was thinking about doing, and dog walker was still in there. So maybe someday.
Oh, wow. Well, hey, anytime you come visit me, there's a job waiting for you. Question number 2, 1,000 points for the first question. Question number 2 is, what has been one transformational sort of idea or book that came into your life earlier on that just made you see life in a completely different way?
I think so. A book or an idea?
Yeah.
Oh boy, this is a hard question. I think that when I went to grad school, I went to school in hardcore sciences, that always felt like it was memorization. And the first time that a professor said, we're the biggest creators on earth because we're trying to figure out how the world works, and then we're trying to create things to modify the world around us, was the moment that I realized that science is actually a super creative endeavor. And I think that transformed the way that I approach science kind of entirely.
Oh, that's beautiful. I really think that bringing some art into the science is so important. And I love the mission of as to why you started Pendulum, which we'll get into after we finish the 5 to Thrive. So question number 3 is, if you were in an elevator that is locked up in 24 hours, knowing that only in 24 hours can you be released to the outside world, outside of food and water, what is the one thing from the outside world that you would wish to have with you?
My husband. Food, water, and sex. Those are the 3 keys to life.
Oh, I think you just earned more fans there. Excellent. I'm pretty sure he would love that answer as well. Question number 4 is, if you were in a stadium filled with 100,000 people, and I gave you a microphone to sing your favorite karaoke song, what song would you sing?
No, this is terrible. First of all, I hate karaoke. I'm like the worst Asian ever. I do not like karaoke. I'm like super embarrassed to sing. But let's see, if I had to pick one, I'm going to say something totally cheesy. All right, I guess if we're talking about a song that speaks to me, it would be Jesus Take the Wheel. It's a country song. I don't know, probably not that many people know it, but the whole point of the song is that we're not really in control around here.
Oh, that's so good. I mean, that's very Awesome point. And just to go along with the ride, question number 5 is, outside of your husband, which you would bring for sex on the elevator, what is one
Sorry,
thing
and
right now
company and
that
conversation. I should say that.
I'd love to meet him. The first time I meet him, I know what we're going to talk about. But question number 5 is, what is one of the things that just bring you joy automatically every time you think, see, or interact with this one thing? What's one thing that brings you joy?
I think that something that sort of consistently brings me joy is morning. I've always been a morning person. I love morning, and I literally, I have the same routine every morning and go out and walk, and it just feels really good. I'm super early in the morning, so there's nobody else out there.
Mm,
And it just always feels good. I feel inspired, energized. It's sort of the quiet of the morning that lets you kind of set the stage and your intentions for the day. And it just
mm.
always feels really good.
Oh, very good. Well, 5 out of 5, you win the 5 to Thrive, which was a meal on me. And I want you to invite your husband, and we'll make it a double date. I'll bring my fiance as well. So let's kind of get into it. You started Pendulum Life, which is, a company that really focuses on how to optimize our microbiome, which we'll talk about in a second. But how did you come from somebody who loved walking dogs and a female that's really going into the hardcore sciences? When did you start to kind of like, pique your interest in the hardcore science? And then at what moment in your life did you start to kind of dive in a lot deeper into the microbiome?
I think the transition from dog walker to actual job is probably has a lot to do with needing to eat and pay rent. And I think that even in college, I didn't really know, I didn't have a vision or a plan for what I was going to do. And in fact, going to graduate school was a suggestion from a professor, not really my own idea. And it was
Mhm.
sort of a last minute scramble of, she pulled me into her office and said, "What do you think you're going to do after graduation?" And I said, "I'm probably going to go live at home because I don't know what I want to do." And after she rolled her eyes at me, she said, "Have you ever thought about grad school?" And I hadn't. And so she basically gave me some brochures. We talked about it, and I ended up applying. And it wasn't even until I was in graduate school that I started to develop a love of science. And it really was that creativity thing that I think was a changing point for me from, this is just something that I'm memorizing and learning, to this is a way to have an impact on the world. And it was then in my early 20s that I sort of decided, okay, health is how I want to impact what I want to do with my life, how I want to make
Yeah.
an impact here. And then I kind of did a pretty traditional postdoc. I worked in a pharma company. I did what everyone does when they live in Silicon Valley. I joined a startup. We went through rapid growth. We went public, and then I started this company. And to tell you the truth, I didn't become interested in the microbiome until we were talking about starting this company. And it was a little bit over 10 years ago, but it's really a little bit over 10 years ago. That's when microbiome became a real science.
Yeah.
And it's premised on DNA sequencing technologies. And I was working at a DNA sequencing technology company. And so that's when so my background's in biochemistry and molecular biology, so it's not very far off. But I never thought about the microbiome or learned about the microbiome, this ecosystem that's in us and on us, and all the different ways that it impacts our health, until I started this company.
And what have you discovered? We've had different experts, so I'll lead with that. But I find that so many people are giving us so many more fascinating insights of just how dynamic and how much we rely on these things that we are not even conscious of. So can you tell me, over the past 10 years, what you've learned in terms of how the microbiome actually impacts our health and who we are?
Yeah, maybe I'll say, I'll give you two little factoids. So the first is related to actually why I started the company.
Yeah.
And it's that my first daughter was born prematurely. She was 4.5 pounds when she was born, and spent the first month of her life in intensive care, where she received multiple doses of antibiotics. And I noticed in her, as she started to get older, that she had food sensitivities that the rest of our family didn't have. And she really had to watch what she was eating. She was watching out for dairy, trying to eat a lot of fiber foods. And so this paper came out around that time, which showed that babies who were on a lot of antibiotics were more prone to obesity and type 2 diabetes as they got older. And then the Mayo Clinic actually repeated this study, and they showed that if you're on a lot of antibiotics as a kid under 2 years old, you're more prone to things like obesity, diabetes, ADHD, allergies, asthma, celiac disease. And I think that's such an important thing to know. Now, I'm not an antibioticer. People should take antibiotics. They save millions of lives. But it's just that when you're doing that, it's important to take note that you're actually, dropping a nuclear bomb on your system, and you're killing all these microbes that are really important for you. And you may notice that you have food sensitivities, or that you have developed sensitivities over time, and it may be correlated to a deficit in your microbiome as opposed to the millions of other reasons why you might be having these issues. So that's the first thing, that we're always changing our microbiome, don't necessarily know we're doing it. But the second thing that I've come to appreciate is that our gut lining is such an important part of our health. We talk about when we exercise our core. Oh man, if you can get your core strength up, you can do any exercise that you want. Well, the gut actually happens to be located right there too. The gut lining is the core of our health. And so there are microbes whose job it is to keep that gut lining strong and to keep the integrity of that gut lining strong. And when you're low or missing that function, you have all kinds of diseases that all of a sudden start to pop up.
Yeah, we know that the gut lining is closely associated with our immune system. We know that a lot of the neurotransmitters, is really, starts from the gut out, that it's our microbiome that is so closely linked to our health, our mood, our metabolism. Is there anything you could think of in our health that is not closely tied to the gut?
Well, that's not really fair, because I'm a little bit of a hammer looking at everything like it's a nail. But it is amazing to me. One of the things that shocked me was that one of our products, which was designed to improve the way people metabolize sugar, people came back and said, I have less sugar cravings now. And we were not expecting that at all, but it really is tied to things that you wouldn't necessarily expect.
Now, there are a lot of probiotics that are in the space, with lots of different type of strains of bacteria. What made you decide we wanted to do something different? And what is different from how you're approaching the microbiome that people might not be considering as they're taking probiotics?
Well, yeah, I think the first kind of factor of fiction is the idea that there are tons of probiotics. So obviously, all of us have stood in a grocery store or pharmacy and looked at the shelves and shelves of probiotics. Most of us have been confused about what to do next. And it feels like there are just a ton of probiotics out there. But I would just alter that to say there are a lot of brands selling probiotics out there, because the actual probiotics that are in those boxes, if you turn around your reading labels, you'll start to see a pattern. And that is that everything on the shelves today starts with either the word lactobacillus or the word bifidobacterium. They're all kind of falling into these same families. And even though there are new strains that kind of come on in the market, they're really just iterations of the old strains. And those strains do have benefit, and there's clinical data behind those, but there actually hasn't been a truly novel ingredient introduced into the probiotic space in over 50 years. And so that's where you start to say, holy smokes, of all the different microbes that exist in our gut, which we can now sequence them, we are only tapping into less than 1% of the things that are actually impacting our health. There's a lot of room for innovation and novelty and mapping the microbiome and finding new targets and bringing new products that can help people with all these different, disease and health indications. And that's really the inspiration.
This episode of the Thrive State podcast is brought to you by the Thrive State Accelerator. The Thrive State Accelerator is actually a home course that I developed using the exact same techniques I work with my celebrity clients, CEOs, and executives on how to get them to the Thrive State. The Thrive State Accelerator teaches you how to master your 7 bioenergetic elements. That's sleep, nutrition, movement, stress and emotional mastery, relationships, our thoughts and mindset, as well as purpose. In this Thrive State Accelerator, you're also going to get a bonus module on optimization. That's how I talk about supplementation, peptides, all the optimization techniques I use with my clients to get them to the Thrive State. Now, for some of you who are just joining us for the first time, you guys might be wondering, what is the Thrive State? Well, the Thrive State is actually the energy, the epigenetic environment we give to ourselves, telling our DNA how to act and how to respond. And if we want optimal health, longevity, and peak performance, if we can master these 7 bioenergetic elements, our ability to have those 3 things that we just said, optimal health, longevity, and peak performance, is at its greatest. And it also prevents you from getting chronic symptoms like brain fog, being overweight, feeling sluggish, acne, pain, all these chronic symptoms, as well as preventing you from getting chronic disease. So getting to that Thrive State is really getting to that state to master being that very best version of yourself so you could show up for you, for your family, for your business, everything that's important to you. So go ahead, check it out right now at kienvuu.com/accelerator and use coupon code podcast25 for 25% off. Now back to the podcast.
You speak and you guys have acromantia, which is something that, unless you're in the biohacking space or really on the cutting edge space here, you haven't heard of the species. Tell us a little bit more about that and why, why it's so, so novel and how come it's not incorporated in other type of formulas, and what's so special about acromantia?
Yeah, I think if you're listening to this now, you're really at the forefront of learning about these strains. I mean, Akkermansia right now is, first of all, it's a mouthful, and it's not a strain that very many people know about. But, when omega-3s first came out, there was also that period where no one knew what they were. And so I think Akkermansia will slowly make its way into the vernacular as more data comes out and more doctors actually get excited about it. So Akkermansia is not a lactobacillus. It's not a bifidobacterium. It's a totally new type of strain. And it is the only strain that literally lives in your gut lining. And your gut lining is it's like a fence. Like I have a wooden fence in my backyard. When I first moved here, the fence was awesome. All the planks were really strong. The glue between them was really strong. But what happens over time and weather is that that glue can start to weaken and those planks can eventually start to fall. And our gut lining is literally exactly the same way. We literally have these planks and this glue that's holding them together, this mucin layer. And Akkermansia's job is to sit there all day and all night, right at that fence, and make sure that the glue is always strong and that the planks are always strong, and to take things down when they're not working and to replenish. And so it is a keystone strain. And it turns out that if you're low in Akkermansia, that's been correlated to obesity, diabetes, neurological disorders like Parkinson's disease, cardiovascular disease. And so to your point earlier, that the immune system and the inflammatory response are tied to our gut. This is the guy that's making sure that things aren't leaking all over the place.
Oh, so good. Now tell us a little bit about, as we swallow these probiotics, what exactly is happening? Can we just say that we swallow a probiotic and whatever's in the probiotic actually becomes the actual flora? Does it then begin to populate, or do we take these things in and are they just transiently going through our gut and giving us metabolites? What are the different ways probiotics are actually functioning after we swallow it?
Well, the disclaimer, of course, is that it's different for every person.
Right.
And so some of the things to look out for are, when you're taking a probiotic, what is that capsule made of? Because the first thing that can happen is you take a probiotic, the capsule dissolves in your stomach, and nothing else happens after that.
Yeah.
And so assuming that you have viable cells in the capsule and the capsule makes it to your distal colon, which is where the gut microbiome is, what happens at that point is that the capsule dissolves and these strains are now exposed in the gut microbiome. And usually when you're taking a capsule, it's sort of in a freeze-dried state or sporulated state. And so when it gets to the gut microbiome, the first thing that has to happen is these strains have to come back to life. And so when they come back to life, there's a lot of dependency on what else is there. And so it's sort of like you have a garden, you want to plant new seeds there. It really depends. Are you planting it somewhere that's really crowded? Are you planting it somewhere that has sunlight? Are you planting it somewhere where you have exposure to water? It's the same thing in your gut microbiome. It's an existing flora. You're asking these guys to show up. take foothold and be able to thrive. And so in some cases, these strains will come to life, do their job, and then get flushed out, and in some cases, they'll take foothold and start to colonize. And you really do have some control over feeding them the things that will help them thrive and trying to create an ecosystem where they can grow.
That's a really great, or brings up a very great question, is that how do we best support the intake of probiotics? Is it taking, prebiotics? And if so, what are some of the things that you recommend people should be taking?
Yeah, I mean, you asked me earlier if you were stuck in an elevator and you only had food and, not counting food and water, what else would you have? And we know food and water are important for every living being. And so feeding these microbes, the good microbes, prebiotics and foods that are high in prebiotics that feed them is really important. And so we know that a high fiber diet is really good for us. Lots of fruits and vegetables. And the reason those are good for us is because they're feeding those good bugs. Polyphenols are also really good for us. And so there are, certain foods that are high in polyphenols that can really help boost your microbiome, particularly the growth of Akkermansia. And so feeding, your body and your microbes high fiber foods and things that are high in polyphenols is great for growing strains.
Yeah, you mentioned three things that every human needs was actually food, food, water, and sex. Is there a version of that for the microbes in our gut?
Well, maybe the original intention of sex was to procreate. And so this colonization is about how do these cells divide and continue to thrive there, have generations and generations of cells.
Oh, that's great. So tell us a little bit more. From what you're explaining, constructing a probiotic is not only important in terms of the strain, but it's actually how they're encapsulated, where they're encased. Can the body actually dissolve what's actually there so that the probiotic can get into place? Can you talk about how Pendulum is different from the other probiotics that are out there?
Well, I think for the most part, probiotics are, as I said, they're sort of a recycling of the strains that are already out there. Yeah. And because there's so many choices for people, one of the easy ways for you to make a choice is to pick the thing that appears to have the highest colony count or highest CFU at the lowest price. That feels like that's my price performance metric. And so you skimp on the capsule because nobody is asking like, oh, does this capsule have an enteric coating to it? Or does it enable me to get through the stomach acid? So I think that's one of the things that we've really invested in. So we've invested in what is the right encapsulation. We've invested in the discovery of innovative strains. So the strains that are in our products, you actually cannot find on the shelves anywhere else. We had to go through the process of identifying them, figuring out how to manufacture them, which is actually, turns out some of them are quite, diva in their behavior. And then we had to go through the process of demonstrating that they're safe. Because if you just pick a strain that's already out there and you throw it into a product, you're going to be able to get it onto the market. You don't have to say anything about whether it's safe or not. But when you're bringing something new, you have to do a lot of work to demonstrate this thing is actually going to be safe. And so I think those are the main things that differentiate us, is figuring out what are the novel strains that can impact health in very discrete and measurable ways, and then figuring out how do you deliver them so that you can confer that benefit, and then bringing them to the world through this relatively tedious 10-year-long process of demonstrating they bring you benefit and they're safe.
Yeah, I can't wait to try them. We got them delivered to us. We got introduced from a very good friend of mine who is raving about Pendulum and the products, David Nurse. For those that don't know him, he's a multi-bestseller in books. His new book is Do It. He's a MBA coach, and he was just talking about how one of the products, your glucose control product, has actually really reduced his sugar cravings. Can you talk a little bit about that? And I know there's an ingredient there that's actually quite temperature sensitive, which is something new that we find in the probiotic space.
Yeah, so the sugar cravings thing is really interesting. And yes, David, I think he was sort of intrigued by the microbiome and our products, but it was when he started to realize he had reduced sugar cravings that all of a sudden he was like, all right, now we got to introduce this to the world, because I think it's one of the things that many of us struggle with and then feel guilty about, right? Why can't I control my cravings? And then you end up in this sort of bad cycle of poor choices and then feeling guilty about it and then making more of them. And so I think to be able to get off that hamster wheel and to not have those cravings and then feel good about choices is sort of the beginnings towards, continuing to optimize your health. So the reduced sugar cravings, well, I'll just say it's still a little bit of a mystery how that happens. But there's two things that we do know. One is that these products produce GLP-1. And so we know that GLP-1s, which have become quite famous lately, one of the big things that GLP-1s do is they improve your satiety. They make you less hungry. And so because our microbes actually induce GLP-1, that's likely the way in which they're improving satiety. I don't think we entirely understand how GLP-1 is doing that, but that's happening. The other mechanism is through GABA. So actually, our formulation is able to produce GABA, and GABA is a small molecule which is quite well known to reduce stress and anxiety. And we know that stress and anxiety can cause people to have certain food cravings. Again, I'm not sure we totally understand that pathway, but if you can reduce stress and anxiety, feel more calm, you tend to not be then, rummaging through your cabinets trying to, satiate yourself with things that maybe aren't so great for you. And so I think the GABA production and the GLP-1 production are kind of the clearest paths to why people have reduced sugar cravings.
Oh, excellent. Is there a specific strain that is particularly sensitive to temperature, that is in your glucose product, that we would have to keep this product actually refrigerated?
Yes. So the Pendulum glucose control product has 5 strains in it. And we worked really hard to try to get those strains to be stable at room temperature. But there's always one difficult problem child. And so our problem child is a strain called anaerobe butyricum heli. It is, as its name suggests, it helps produce butyrate, and butyrate is a really important small molecule for gut health. And that strain does not like to be warmed up. It wants to stay cold. So it is the one strain that's problematic. So if you accidentally leave your glucose control out on the counter for a few days, the other strains are actually perfectly fine. It's just that one strain that will be less viable.
Sounds good. Can you talk a little bit about the different products you have and lines you have? And can somebody actually take all of them together at the same time? Do you recommend cycling through them? What is the protocol that you recommend for most people?
So if you have type 2 diabetes or pre-diabetes, or you're trying to lower your A1C or your blood glucose spikes, Pendulum Glucose Control is a product that you want to take. And it is the most expensive product and requires refrigeration. So it is the highest maintenance one out there. It's the one that I take, though. I mean, I wore a continuous glucose monitor. I actually don't have pre-diabetes or diabetes, but I am aging. And one of the things that happens to us as we age is we don't metabolize our glucose as efficiently. And I found for myself when I was on placebo versus Pendulum Glucose Control that all of my sugar spikes and crashes were minimized. And for me, that showed up. I knew when I was on the product because I had more energy in my workouts. And so that was really, so there's the Pendulum Glucose Control. Now, if you aren't kind of trying to hardcore lower your blood glucose spikes or battle the, onset of diabetes, you can take Metabolic Daily. Metabolic Daily, as opposed to being at $165 a month, is at $49 a month. So a lot more affordable. And it's exactly the same as glucose control, but it's a lower dose version. So this is for anybody who wants to metabolize your sugars and carbs better. Give yourself the bugs that are going to help you metabolize sugars and carbs more efficiently. And then we actually sell some of the individual strains by themselves. So we sell Akkermansia by itself. We sell Butyricum by itself. This is for people if you've taken like a gut microbiome test or you're talking to your healthcare professional and they're sort of saying, hey, I think you're low in this particular strain. You don't have to take the whole formulation. You can go directly and replenish the particular strain that you're low in. And so that's kind of how to make the decisions.
Oh, great. In terms of, you bring up the question as in discovering if you're low in strain, is there particular diagnostics that you find are accurate that people can use to determine if they are low in any particular strain?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of gut microbiome tests out there, and they kind of fall into 2 categories. One is tests that use qPCR, which is a very quantitative approach to measure your strains. And the other is DNA sequencing, which is a very thorough way to look at your entire microbiome. And so I sort of think of it, again, I think a lot about, forests and ecosystems, but basically if you're looking at a forest and you're asking the question, hey, what are all the different things that are growing in this forest? You want to use the DNA sequencing test. If you're looking at a forest and you say, I want to know how many 4-leaf clovers are in this forest, then you should do a qPCR test. So it really depends on what you're looking for. That kind of defines which test you should take.
So good. I can't wait to dive in. I believe I do have acromantia, the glucose control, and I am a prior diabetic. So anything to help me in that regard will be much, much appreciated. And I have the metabolic daily as well that I can't wait to dive into. Before I ask my very last, go ahead.
Since you're now mentioning all these bottles you have and you had asked whether you could take them all, I will tell you that I did. So I started on Pendulum Glucose Control. That was our first product. And then as we released these new products, I was like, man, the chef should always try their cooking for sure. Right. And so there was a point at which I was taking Pendulum Glucose Control, Metabolic Daily, Akkermansia, and then we also sell polyphenols that help grow our Akkermansia. And I was like having like 8 pills a day. That was a little much. And to be totally honest, I didn't see any additional benefit from taking all of them. And so I just have gone back to just Pendulum Glucose Control. So if you're really low in a particular strain, you're trying to get a boost, there might be like a period of time where you're really replenishing, and then you can kind of go to a maintain state.
And I love the fact that you said that too, because I mean, you're an owner and you could tell everybody, hey, no, take everything. But really, it really sounds like there is a good approach, because those people that really want to kind of tighten up their blood sugar and those cravings, it sounds like glucose control actually covers, quite a bit of it, and you could just take that. And if you're not quite in that camp, it sounds like a metabolic daily is going to be something you want. And if you happen to be working with somebody that is actually demonstrated you're low in any particular strain, you've got that as well as the polyphenols to help activate Akkermansia and some of the other strains that you have. All right, well, I think that was a very good summary there. Now, before I ask my very last question, where can people find out more about the work that you do and more about Pendulum Life?
You can go to our website, pendulumlife.com. We have a lot of the publications and the science and how all this stuff works. If you're a healthcare professional yourself, we have an entire section of the website dedicated to you. And so you can get access to white papers and protocols and a deeper dive into how do you select what's right for your patient. And so we have, and honestly, if you're a consumer, you can also log in and get access to that information if you just want to nerd out on it. And so, that's where you can get a ton of information, pendulumlife.com, or you can just go buy our products directly on Amazon. So we're also there. That's easier to just add to your cart.
Oh, very good. So aside from probiotics as being an answer, with everything that you've encountered in life, what has been your best medicine?
Sleep. Actually, my family makes fun of me for the amount of sleep that I have. I mean, I think sleep is so important, and I'm mildly obsessive about it. Like I'm like, oh, it's 9 o'clock. I gotta start my routine. So I get lots and lots of sleep, and then I take naps on weekends. I wish that siesta was acceptable here in the US. But I just think sleep, I want to know when I don't get enough of it. I feel it profoundly the next day.
So beautiful. Colleen Cutcliffe, this was super educational, and you're definitely bringing something new to the probiotic space that I actually haven't seen in any other company. So congratulations for that. I can't wait to try the product. And thank you again for being on the Thrive State podcast.
Thanks so much for having me. And I can't wait to hear which product you decide to take and how it goes for you.
Sounds great.
I hope you enjoyed that episode of the Thrive State podcast. And if this podcast is bringing a lot of value to you, if you find that your life is just improving with this podcast, that your life is getting to the next level, please consider supporting it. And here's a few ways you can do so. You can do so by liking this video and commenting on this video, and also sharing this video with your friends and family. Another thing you can do is go to ratethispodcast.com/ThriveState. Go ahead and leave us a 5-star review there. It will really, really help this show grow. And this will give me more time so that I could actually give more content to you, just like you got in this episode. And if you haven't already picked up a copy of my book, Thrive State, Your Blueprint for Optimal Health, Longevity, and Peak Performance, you can pick it up now. It became a #1 new release in longevity. Go to thrivestatebook.com. And if you enjoy the book, please consider leaving us a review as well. And the last thing you can do, if you're liking everything here and you want to work more closely with me as well as my team to get you into the Thrive State, go to kienvuu.com/accelerator and consider joining the home course, the Thrive State Accelerator. It's really the course that I use. It's the concepts that I use personally when I work with CEOs, celebrities, and my high-profile clients to get them to the Thrive State. Again, the Thrive State Accelerator at kienvuu.com/accelerator. And because you're a listener of this podcast, I want you to save 25% by using the coupon code podcast25. I hope we continue to give value to you. And remember always, you are your best medicine.